This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Go to our website at wdtatpodcast.com and click on support to learn how you can be part of this effort to learn how to have better conversations, increase compassion, and build bridges, not walls. You can make a one-time donation or become a patron for as little as $1 a month and receive patron-only benefits. Thanks to all of our patrons at any level for your support. You are what makes this happen and makes this podcast possible. Thank you. Now let's get into the interview. In this episode, I talked to Suzannah Gonzalez of the News Literacy Project about why there's so much misinformation, what we can do about it, and how her organization can help. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to talk about hard things, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
My guest today is Suzannah Gonzalez. She's the Associate Director of Education for the News Literacy Project, which is a national education nonprofit offering nonpartisan, independent programs that teach students how to know what to trust in the digital age. As the Associate Director of Education, Suzannah collaborates with the education team on new programs and resources. She writes for the SIFT and the News Literacy Project's website and serves as the education team liaison to the Newslit camps and the Newsroom to Classroom program. And she joined News Literacy Project in March 2019 from Reuters, where she spent more than 7 years as a Chicago-based correspondent and an editor liaising with media clients. Welcome to We Don't Talk About That, Suzannah.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about, I know I've kind of in the introduction at least introduced News Literacy Project a little bit, but tell us a little bit about News Literacy Project, how you got involved with them, and what you do in your role with News Literacy Project.
Happy to. The News Literacy Project is a national, nonpartisan, educational nonprofit, as you mentioned, and we're working to empower educators to teach young people to become smart consumers of news and information, and to help them sort fact from fiction. And we think that helping young people to do this will help them become more engaged participants in their communities, civic life, and our democracy. And as the Associate Director of Education, I co-write our free weekly newsletter called The SIFT, which you mentioned. And the SIFT pulls teachable news literacy lessons from recent news events. And I also help develop educational resources such as quizzes on social media misinformation policies. That's currently on our website, newslit.org. And I also previously worked on a quiz about how newsrooms work, which is available on our Checkology virtual classroom. I also help create classroom activities on sourcing and fact-checking. Mm-hmm. And I work with journalist volunteers through our Newsroom to Classroom program, which seeks to connect educators and students with working journalists for news literacy conversations.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons, the main reason I wanted to have you on the program is in conversations, you know, my podcast focuses a lot on things that we have a hard time talking about. And so sometimes that's just topics like, say, immigration or abortion or, you know, controversial topics that people disagree about. And what I find often in those conversations is that when people start to share sources or information from different areas, there's a disconnect where we disagree about what things are okay or good sources of information and what things are not okay. And so this whole problem that has sort of arisen of misinformation and fake news, which is maybe just not the best term, I think, to use anymore. Like, it's become such a problem in how we can even talk to each other. And so the work that you guys are doing with the News Literacy Project, I find so helpful in providing resources. And I know you're focused on education, but it feels like we all really need a lot of the tools and things that you're providing, not just students, you know? Yeah.
Agree.
So why do you think this has, it feels like it's been over the last maybe 5 years or so that this has really arisen, and maybe it does go further back, but why is this becoming such a big problem where we don't know how to sort of sift through all the information that's coming at us, and we're kind of getting suckered into a lot of misinformation?
Well, the news ecosystem has changed and expanded tremendously, and we're now faced with the most complex information landscape in history. And so it can be difficult to know what to believe. We are not only getting news and information from newspapers, TV, radio stations, but also now from 24-hour news sources, from social media, blogs, and podcasts, for example.
Yeah.
So we're inundated with information, and it can be challenging to sort all of that out.
Yeah. So what do you recommend? You know, I mentioned this sort of problem we have when we're engaging in discussions about different ideas, and we come up against this problem of, well, you know, oftentimes it comes down to, you know, Fox News versus CNN or something like that, right? I listen to this source, and so I believe this source, and you listen to this source, and we just aren't going to agree, and there's no way to sort of, it feels often like an impasse, like we can't get past that point to try and have some common ground to talk from. What are some of your ideas or recommendations for how do we overcome that problem?
Well, as you alluded to, my background is in journalism. I joined the News Literacy Project after spending more than 20 years in newsrooms, and I worked as a reporter for a number of years. So my answer to this question is from a journalist perspective. I would suggest treating sources the way a journalist would, and check them out before accepting that the information that they are providing is credible. Journalists at standards-based news organizations, for example, they work to follow a set of ethical guidelines that are made public. So if you're reading a source that you're unsure about online, for example, I would encourage doing a search for these guidelines on their site or on a search engine. And take notice and be wary about sources that don't have such guidelines in place. And also, if a news source runs corrections, as a journalist, we hate corrections.
Yeah, sure. I do too. It's not just journalists. I don't like to have to apologize either.
But if a news source, as a consumer of news, and you run into a correction, that's actually a good sign. They corrections signal that the source is transparent about its mistakes, that it holds itself accountable, and it's committed to setting the record straight and is committed to the truth. So when you see things like corrections or clarifications or editor's notes, those are good signs.
You know, I just a brief comment. I often feel like people share stories about, you know, Washington Post has a correction as a gotcha moment a little bit, like, oh, see, they messed up, right? And you're saying, no, that's actually a good sign. They messed up and then they admitted it, and that's actually means that we can maybe have more confidence and a little more trust in them as a source. I think that's maybe something new. It's a little bit new to me, but new to other people as well.
Yes, that's an interesting point. But I agree. I think that it's the good side of a correction. No one's perfect. I certainly have had to run corrections as much as it hurt me inside when I worked as a journalist. But they must be done. They're a signal of our credibility.
Yeah. People, I hear this all the time from my local people that are critical of my local newspaper in Texas, as much as people are also critical of larger national media all the time, that people are saying there's a bias and there's a slant and they are on this side and of things. And I think it's really important to what you're saying about having standards and understanding kind of the way that journalism functions when it's functioning well and it's based on standards and has guidelines for reporting. I think that's so helpful, and most people really aren't aware of that, maybe, or looking for that. There's sort of this I don't know what to call it, like common sense in the air that says, oh, they're just all biased and there's no such thing as objectivity. And then you just kind of throw all the, people use the term the media all the time to sort of lump everything together and then throw it all out the window and say it's all the same, it's all bad, and we can't know. And I think it's because people are overwhelmed, like you said, by the amount of information, but knowing that there are news organizations that have standards and are based on certain journalistic ethics and standards, and that you can find those on websites for organizations that have that. That's a super helpful tip.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I'm suggesting to people is think like a journalist in this time of misinformation and too much information. Consider all pieces of information. Check it out, as we say. Does it check out? Are other sources of information reporting the same? Same bits of information? Or check out your source. Does the source have the authority to speak on the subject? Can they be trusted? Ask questions that journalists ask as they're doing their work.
Yeah. So you on the News Literacy Project website have lots of really great tools and resources, but for kind of understanding the things that trip people up and kind of mistakes that people make in trying to wade through all the information. But what are some of the most common things that you would say trip people up when they're seeing a viral message going around or believing in certain things that seem to be popping up all over the place? What are some of the most common things that trip people up when trying to discern between what's misinformation and what's real news?
I think employing just observation skills as you're being encountered by information is an important first step. So let's say you get a piece of information, you're not sure whether or not it's true. Look at the comments, for example. See if anybody else has been questioning credibility of this bit of information. See if maybe somebody has posted a link to a fact-checking organization that has checked out this claim. Even the simple things like make sure that the date is a current date. I mean, news articles get recycled all the time over social media and on various websites, and just take a look. Quick, that takes 10 seconds to see if there's a date posted, and that can save a lot of trouble as well.
Yeah. Your organization says that it's nonpartisan, and a lot of fact checking. You mentioned fact checking websites also, right? Say that they are nonpartisan, and a lot of times I find people, even though an organization says they're nonpartisan, if I use them as a source, sometimes people say, "Oh, they're have a liberal bias, or they have a certain bias, and so I don't trust them. Tell us a little bit, what does it mean to be nonpartisan, and what is it that helps sort of guard organizations like yours and maybe some of those fact-checking websites against the bias that people tend to throw at them?
One of the ways the News Literacy Project shows that it is nonpartisan is through our board. Our board is made up of people who have served in Republican and Democratic administrations. The News Literacy Project also was founded more than a decade ago in 2008. So we have been at this for a long time, and we have a long history of not advocating for one side or the other. People can read the SIFT and see examples from both the left and the right. Also, being partisan is not in our interest. We strive to help people sort fact from fiction, and that needs to happen in both red states and blue states.
Yeah, often I think what happens is people don't mind the source until it challenges something maybe that they do believe, right? And then when it's challenging their side, it's kind of like, wait a second, I don't know if I can trust this anymore because now it's something that's challenging me, right? And I think part of what you're saying and advocating as an organization is that we all have to challenge ourselves and be open to being wrong, like, making corrections like good newspapers and journalists. And it also gets to something we on this podcast have talked about a lot, is having more curiosity. I feel like people tend to read the news with less curiosity and a lot more confirmation bias, trying to find those things that support what they already believe. And so trying to read things with more curiosity helps us not react so defensively when, the News Literacy Project challenges something that we may have shared on social media that turns out not to be true.
Yes, I'm nodding in agreement. You bring up a couple of really good points, and I'm all for being more curious, being more skeptical about information you come across. Also, it's important to recognize when you do have a reaction to something that you read or see. That having an emotional reaction can be a sign that it is misinformation, because misinformation works to incite strong feelings in us. So, and it also could be an indication of our own personal bias. You mentioned confirmation bias as well, which is another thing to be mindful of. One thing that we suggest is, if you have a reaction, to pause and be aware of your emotions before taking a next step to share it. For example, check out the information first before sharing it.
Yeah, we like to think that we're a lot more rational as human beings than we are, and we all have things that we're emotional about, passionate about, and that kind of elicit those responses in us. And it's okay to admit, like, if I read something that challenges or disagrees with me and I have a strong reaction, I might need to check that reaction. And it is hard for us to pause because of the 24-hour cycle, and there's constant information coming at us. And so, we did a whole episode actually on silence, and that was one of the best things about that episode, was saying, sometimes pausing is the best thing that we can do in difficult conversations and when we're feeling, overwhelmed by the amount of information coming at us. Being able to pause, it can be one of the hardest things to do, but one of the best things as we're trying to, manage all of the things coming at us.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
The News Literacy Project has recently, I try to avoid timely topics on this podcast, but I'm going to break that rule with you because we're in the middle of a pandemic with COVID-19 around the globe. I'm here in quarantine in Bolivia, and in the U.S., you guys are in quarantine as well, different to varying degrees from what I understand. But you at the News Literacy Project have started a page on COVID-19 misinformation. Tell us a little bit about how that's been, because this has all been happening so fast and sort of coming at us. How have you guys responded to what's happening right now with the pandemic and COVID-19?
Well, we're certainly still in the process of developing more resources to offer, so please stay tuned. We do offer already some wonderful COVID-19 related resources. We have, for example, developed a COVID-19 themed lesson on our mobile app called Informable. And that's where you can practice your news literacy skills and test your skills trying to differentiate between news and opinion, ad or not, for example. And it's a great way to think about news literacy skills. We also have available on our website an infographic that provides a few simple tips that one can follow while consuming the news. I think we call it sanitize before you share, 4 quick steps to stop the spread of misinformation. So that's on our website. Our last few issues of the SIFT have been dominated by COVID-19 news and developments. So it's certainly an important part of our work currently.
It's so helpful. Also, on I know on your COVID-19 page, you give some trusted sources, which I think is really helpful too, when people are reading, getting their information from things people are sharing on social media, finding places that we can go to sort of check and debunk things. And I subscribe to the SIFT. I think it's fantastic. It's so helpful in the examples that you guys give of things that are shared on social media, and then breaking down what the truth is, why it's a problem, and giving some helpful tips on how those examples are so helpful in being able to start noticing things that maybe we don't notice. We tend to overlook. Tell us a little more about the things that are available on the website. You mentioned the app Informable, and I know there's news quizzes. I have taken some of your quizzes and been sad that I wasn't better at them. It really does highlight ways that maybe you think you are really good at telling, fact from fiction, but those quizzes are good to sort of check your assumptions a little bit and how good you think you are. So what are some of those resources on the website that people can use and the app as well?
Absolutely. Well, our main offering is our Checkology virtual classroom. And something I want to mention is that we are now offering free of charge to public educators and parents with remote learners our Checkology virtual classroom. So, and you can register for that online from our website. And Checkology is great because it offers several news literacy lessons on subjects such as understanding bias, practicing quality journalism, and making news judgments. And our understanding bias lesson actually is fairly new. It debuted earlier this year. And it is such a complicated, complex topic, and I'm a fan of how it turned out. We handled it in a very nuanced way, which I think is important for this very complicated topic. So that's an important resource that we offer.
That's one I haven't checked
sure.
out yet. Yeah.
Sure, that you can find that. You can get that on your mobile devices, and it's a brain trainer mobile app designed to test your news literacy skills. It's for most ages. I think we suggest that people over 13, that you're at least 13 years old to use it. But it's something that families can play together. You are scored on, differentiating between whether or not something is news and opinion or an advertisement or not. Is this evidence or not? Things like this. And there's a mix-up mode, and we are continually adding new examples. So it's great fun, and we've heard some good feedback on it.
Yeah, as a parent, my oldest is now 13, almost 14, and I remember being very cognizant early on about advertising, and thinking about media literacy with my kids, and making sure that they understood when they were being sort of advertised to, and trying, for them to be pretty intelligent about things they were consuming. I'm not sure how well I did, but, I at least was aware and was trying to, right? But I don't think when I first became a parent, I realized it wouldn't just be about advertising, but it would be also news literacy that they needed as well, to really be able to sift through all the media that's coming at them. And so it sounds like the Informable app is a great tool for parents as well, and families to be learning together about dealing with the media, and how do you know. I feel like I have conversations with my kids all the time about what's real and what's not. They love to watch YouTube, and they get sometimes into interesting conspiracy theories on YouTube. My daughter was very into the Flat Earth group for a while, primarily, I think, as a thought experiment. But when she came to me, and I didn't realize how much she'd been watching this stuff, and said, "Hey, did you know there's all these reasons that the Earth is flat?" And my, the hair on my neck stood up, and I just was like, "Oh no, what have I done? I failed. What is happening?" So I appreciate these resources. Yeah.
We're actually beginning work on a new Techology lesson on conspiracy theories. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, as you're aware, the latest, I think, SIFT that just came out has a number of these conspiracy theories that have just taken off. Just this week, I received some emails from family members and different people promoting some of these conspiracy theories, and I just was beside myself, like, what? This is so frustrating, in a time that we really don't need to be battling misinformation. We need to be working together to solve problems together. It feels so frustrating sometimes to be battling these conspiracy theories and misinformation. So I guess what I'm saying is thank you so much, because the work you guys are doing is so important to try and help us be able to focus, get the skills we need to sift through and focus on the things that we need to, and know the difference.
Well, thank you so much for checking out our resources and for being a reader of the SIFT. It's always gratifying to hear that people find it useful. So we appreciate that.
Well, I like to end my podcast with two questions, two things, going out and going deeper. So going out is, I know we can't go out right now during the quarantine, but we can try to find ways that we can take action. So it's an action recommendation, and then going deeper. And you have provided so many fabulous resources. So I don't know if you have anything to add. I feel like I don't. I think my going out is subscribe to the SIFT, and going deeper is go to newslit.org and start availing yourself of these resources. But what
sounds like a good plan.
what can you recommend to people as some steps that they can take visiting the site and using the resources that you guys have, but some things that you would recommend as first steps for people that are just maybe beginning to realize, oh, I need to be more careful about what I'm consuming.
Oh, sure. Well, we're encouraging that in the same amount of time that we're advised to wash our hands, 20 seconds, we can debunk information. For example, in the comments of a social media post, look for a link to credible information, as I mentioned earlier. Look to see if other people are questioning the claim being made. And if there's no source of information, don't share it. Stop the spread of misinformation. And if you share information that turns out not to be true, be aware that there are possible effects down the line. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For example, people you shared that misinformation with could have already shared it with others.
Yeah.
And we recommend instead, being a proactive sharer of credible information from credible sources.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic because it does operate so similar to a virus. That's why this information is called viral when it starts spreading around to everyone else. And so I love this sanitize before you share resource that you guys have on the website, and the idea of we're all trying to take 20 seconds to wash our hands and do a much better job. It doesn't take that long. We can take 20 seconds also to be more careful about what we're sharing and do a little bit of extra research. And it doesn't need to take. We don't all have to become journalists. We don't all have to become experts in every field. You guys are providing some really helpful resources in a short amount of time to start being able to tell the difference. So, yeah, that's really great.
Thank you so much.
Well, Suzannah, I really appreciate your time and what you guys are doing at the News Literacy Project. I hope that, the conversation today and then as well as the resources that you have on newslit.org can really be helpful. I will share links to everything in the show notes for the episode so people can find the website, Checkology. Again, just since this is a timely episode, parents and teachers do have access to Checkology free right now, so please go check that out if you're a parent at home with kids doing schooling or teachers as a resource for educating your students about news literacy. We'll have links to all of that, and please keep up the good work, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, listeners, before I let you go, I just wanted to share with you that we are on all social media sharing Fake News Fridays, in which I have been sharing news information, links to a lot of the work that the News Literacy Project is doing. So please keep an eye out for that. Stay informed and make sure you are sanitizing your information. Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?
vaya bien.